Right, good afternoon and welcome along to Rushcliffe Borough Council's Planning Committee meeting. Before I start, I'd like to remind you that the committee meeting is being live streamed on YouTube and a recording of the meeting will be available afterwards on the Council's YouTube channel. In addition, under the Local Authorities Executive Arrangements, Meeting and Access to Information England Regulations 2012, other people may film, record, tweet or blog from this meeting. The use of any such images or sound recordings is not under the Council's control. So welcome along. I'm Councillor Richard Butler. I'm the chairman of the Planning Committee today, and other councillors here today are my Vice Chairman, Councillor Mrs Stockwood, Councillors Bailey, Clark, Gaunt, Healy, Mason, Price, Purdue, Horan, Thomas and Councillor Walker. So welcome to the meeting. And also, whilst I'm just doing the introductions, because we've got a few visitors here today, just to advise you, we're not expecting any fire alarms or procedures. So if the fire alarms go on, we must assume it's real, rather like the one down the road a few minutes ago. And we will evacuate the building through the exits as appropriate, but hopefully we won't be needing to do that. Also, I'm aware of the fact that it's possibly going to be a fairly long meeting, who knows, but at some point during the afternoon, for everyone's comfort, it may be necessary to call a comfort break and just to stretch legs, etc. So if and when, I will let everyone know when that time is and say how long that will be. So we'll go into the main items of the agenda, and the first item is apologies for absence and any substitute members, please.
Councillor Bansal has sent his apologies and Councillor Gaunt is his substitute.
Thank you and welcome. And item 2 is, do we have any declarations of interest under the Code of Conduct or under the Planning Code? Anything to declare? No, I suspect not. And during my introduction, I should have said as well as councillors here this afternoon, we have officers on the top table as well. I have Mrs Sells, who is the solicitor, Mr Ashcroft, who is a service manager for planning, and Mr Miles and Mr Cook, who are planning officers, just for the record, so everyone knows who is here. Before we go into the planning application, members, can I just ask and confirm that you have received and read the late representations that have come through both on email and also a hard copy as well, late comments? Everyone seen those? So yes, thank you very much. Right, so we go on to the main item of the agenda. We have one planning application to discuss and debate and decide today, and this is Nottingham Forest Football Club City Ground, including the Champion Centre, Club Shop and Storage Warehouse and Rowing Club Britannia Boathouse on Pavilion Road in West Bridgford. And this is a hybrid planning application comprising full planning application for the redevelopment of the Peter Taylor stand, including the demolition of existing buildings and structures, new public realm, car parking and associated works, and outline planning application for up to 170 residential units. And this is for approval, access, layout and scale. So the residential aspect of the hybrid application is an outline application. So that means it's to decide on the principle of residential building, just to make that clear. So that's the application we have in front of us. I'm going to ask Mr Ashcroft to lead us through it, and we'll hear, and also on the screen and also on the YouTube will be slides for the presentation. So Mr Ashcroft, thank you.
Chairman, thank you. And my role will be simply for members just to set the scene for a few minutes, and then the case officer, Craig Miles, will take you through the details. And plainly the point won't be lost on members in terms of your activity over the last few weeks, that this application is a far more complex application than those which perhaps you might regularly be seeing at this meeting. Indeed, if you cast your minds back 2 weeks ago, when we dealt with two very modest planning applications, plainly we're dealing with something here that is far more significant. However, I just want to give you the confidence that actually the decision-making process is exactly the same. And if members recall the training that we've had, it is important that we follow that same decision-making process. The next point, and it's the point that we rehearsed in training, decisions must be made in accordance with the development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise. And in our case, the development plan primarily consists of local plan part 1 and part 2. You're in the relatively fortunate place that both elements of the local plan are up to date, and therefore you can continue to give very significant weight to those issues. You will have seen, as you've read through the report, that the report itself is littered with details about the various policies which impact on this planning application. And it's right and appropriate that we've done so, because the legislation is clear that the decision must be made in accordance with the development plan. Plainly also, members will remember, in terms of your normal debate at meetings and also in the training, that you also have to give weight to material planning considerations. And plainly in this case, and as we saw on site, and as you can, as I'll highlight in certain elements from this aerial photograph, here it's slightly more complicated because there are far more material planning considerations than might otherwise be the case, and certainly far more material considerations than we rehearsed at the meeting 2 weeks ago. The important thing here is that you have to address and consider all the material considerations here, and that's why the report is structured in the way in which it is. Plainly, part of the judgment and the decision making is that it allows you as committee members to give appropriate weight as you see fit to the various material considerations. And indeed, you'll see in the recommendation that that is what we have done, and we've apportioned the weight that we think is necessary. Within that broader context, I would remind members that paragraph 199 of the National Planning Policy Framework indicates that where you are considering applications that may have an impact on effectively heritage assets, that effectively great weight should be given to the asset's conservation. And indeed, the more important the asset, the greater the weight that you should be giving to it. And again, that's one of the reasons why we took you on the visit onto Trent Bridge, so that you could effectively stand on one of the heritage assets and look back at the ground, both for the vista that it gave, but also you could see the impact between the two. Chairman, there are several issues here which overlap and effectively give you some guidance about how you should determine the issue. First of all, it's perhaps a statement of the obvious, but there are a complex set of issues and material considerations, which Mr. Miles will take you through. Perhaps the second one, and you see it from this photograph, you saw it on site, that we're dealing here with a very complex and tightly knit urban area, with different buildings, different heights, different land uses. And probably representing a different range of issues than those which you normally grapple with as part of planning schemes. The third critical issue here is that this application doesn't relate to an allocated site within the local plan. In the last 12 months, you've dealt with sites which were allocated housing sites in the local plan. And it's not to suggest that those sites are easier to look at, but there is a definitive policy in the local plan that the developer can understand and work up a scheme to, and which the local planning authority can then determine in the application against. This isn't the case. As good as your local plan is, it didn't anticipate an application of exactly this nature coming forward. And therefore, you need to grapple with a whole series of planning policies rather than one which relates to an allocated site. The fourth issue, as the chairman has highlighted earlier, is that this is a slightly unusual application because it's a hybrid application. And as we described to you out on site, the application for the replacement stand is a full planning application. So you have all the details, and in the event that you are minded to grant permission for it this afternoon, that would be it. The application for the residential development is an outline application. And again, that's exactly similar to other outline applications, where if you're minded to grant permission for the outline application, at some point in the future, a subsequent reserved matters application will come back to you. Fifthly, there has been, and you'll see in your report, a very significant level of public comment on the planning application. They're listed in the report. What we have not done is specifically commented on those comments in the report. And the reason for that is that effectively they correspond with the critical key material planning considerations. So there's a very healthy overlap between public comment, either supporting or objecting to the scheme, and the issues addressed in the report. And Chairman, I'd like to thank here everybody who's commented on the application, because those comments have helped us to bring this application to you with the various recommended outcomes. Chairman, can I also highlight that the drawings in front of you, which we are considering this afternoon, are effectively refinements of those which were originally submitted in 2019. And effectively, the applicant here has responded very positively to comments raised both from officers and indeed from other statutory bodies. Chairman, 4 final points, and these are key issues which I just ask you to bear in mind as we go through the debate. The first one is that the underlying principle of this application is the upgrading of the ground. You saw firsthand the existing condition and state of the Peter Taylor stand. It's plainly not up to the standard of the rest of the ground, and certainly the current status of the football club reinforces further the need for the improvement of the stadium. The second point, and again, which the case officer will take you through, the stand is more than a replacement stand. It includes a wide range of conference and business facilities, which will inevitably extend its uses well beyond match days. The third key issue to bear in mind as we go through the slides and the discussion is that plainly this is a hybrid application. It's principally for 2 buildings, but it's more than just an application for 2 buildings. It's the urban space and the public realm between those 2 buildings. And also it's about the access that the plaza would form onto Trentside North. So increasingly the planning process and the MPPF is as much about public realm and the way in which people can use the space as it is about buildings. And Chairman, the 4th point that I'd just like you constantly to bear in mind, and it goes back to the complex nature of the application. There are similar complex issues that are underpinning your determination of the application in relation to viability, in relation to the developer contributions that Forest is putting forward, travel, access and car parking issues, and also the economic benefits which are agreed would arise from the proposal. Chairman, finally, before I hand over to the case officer, you will have read that the report is also riddled with the word balance. If you remember the planning training, we were saying that quite often tricky applications come to committee because there's a balance to be struck. And effectively, the balance here and the decision is one for you to make. In doing so, please remember that golden rule that you need to consider all the material considerations in coming to your balance and in coming to your judgment. Chairman, thank you. And I'll now hand over to the case officer.
Okay, thank you. So over to Mr. Miles, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I've tried to condense this presentation as short as possible time as I can, because I appreciate the report's very lengthy. And if I went into every detail, I think I'd take up the maximum 4 hours that we've got here. So let's start with what we're dealing with. We're dealing with a hybrid planning application. What's a hybrid planning application? It's an application that seeks both full planning permission, in this case for the stand, and outline planning permission, in this case for a 13-storey tower block with a commercial element to it. I'll just start by outlining the proposals so everyone's clear on what we're determining today. The Peter Taylor stand, the crux of the application is, as Andrew says, the replacement of the Peter Taylor stand itself, and that forms a full application. The replacement stand would be much larger, both in height and depth, compared to the old 1960s stand. It would be approximately 38 metres high, and it would accommodate 10,000 spectators, which is an additional 5,000 presently. It would also be split into 4 floors internally, and it would measure around 109 metres in width and 52 metres in depth, including the corner part, which would form the shop. It would make the height roughly equal to the Trent end and the Brian Clough stand. Now, this would mean that the Champion Centre, the club shop building, together with existing turnstiles and the Robin Hood Hospitality Suite, mean it'd be completely demolished, and it would be mostly replaced by the stand and the plaza, which I'll come on to. Now, the design of the stand broadly replicates the character and appearance of the other stands within the ground. Within the body of the stand, as Andrew mentioned, it's proposed for hospitality, but on non-match days it's proposed for conferencing facilities. As you'd expect, on the ground floor and throughout the buildings, changing rooms, physio rooms, and all other facilities you'd expect, in this case of a Premiership club. The submitted plans indicate the club shop would be relocated to within the stadium. It'd be on the southwest corner of the proposed replacement stand towards Trent side north, basically shown in blue on the left-hand side of that plan. Now, most of the existing car parking that's in place in front of the Peter Taylor stand would be replaced. 35 car parking spaces, together with coach drop-off and turning area, would remain in front of what would be the new stand. The existing larger car parking area to the north would remain completely unaffected by the proposals. Now, I should say the principal access would remain from Pavilion Road, although gatehouse and security access gates would be replaced. Also, a new electrical substation would be created alongside it by the new entrance. I'll move on now to the issues relating to the boathouse. Now, adjacent to the site along Trentside North is the Britannia Boathouse. Now, to extend the Peter Taylor stand, basically the boathouse would have to be demolished. Now, the applicant's been in discussions with Nottingham Rowing Club for a long period of time, and they're supportive of the proposals. Crucially, from our perspective, the boathouse is an asset of community value, which means it's afforded some protection in planning policy terms to ensure that if it is removed, equal or better replacement facilities are in place. The agreement with the applicant is that the demolition of the boathouse would not commence until such time as the replacement facilities are in place. Now, importantly, you need to be aware that there's no details of where or what those replacement facilities would look like or where they would be, but there would be a formal agreement and a legal agreement through a Section 106 agreement to ensure that no development of the boathouse could take place until such time as those facilities are constructed and be available for use. Now, one of the reasons the boathouse has been demolished is to create an open plaza between the back of the stand and the residential element, which you can see pretty much in the middle of the site there. Phil's just highlighting it to you there. It would create a shared surface for both vehicles and pedestrians. On match days, it's anticipated that the plaza would form a secure area for match officials, but otherwise it should remain open. There'd be bollards in place to separate out traffic from pedestrian use, but it would also contain street furniture and landscaping and suitable lighting. You should note that the plaza forms part of the full application. I'll move on to residential proposals now. So the residential proposals are in outline form. We're considering the principal of development, the access, and the layout at this moment in time. The reserved matters for future considerations, if the application is approved, would be landscaping and its design. So it's simply the layout, access, and principle of development we're considering at this stage. Now, the submitted layout plan shows an L-shaped building on the south part of the application site. It would be 13 stories high, broadly replacing the club shop as it is now and the championship centre, together with a few garages and outbuildings. Now, within it, 170 new apartments are proposed, consisting of 1 and 2 bed flats predominantly. There's a few 3 beds, but not many. It would be accessed via a new junction with Pavilion Road. On the ground floor would be a series of new commercial units, and they would face onto the plaza. And to its rear would be an amenity area. On the ground floor and partially the first floor of the development would be 67 off-street car parking spaces, together with 205 cycle spaces. The approach of the applicant to this application is this housing forms inverted commas enabling development. Their approach is, should permission be granted for it, it would be sold to a developer and those funds would be helped towards the construction of the stand. Clearly, the replacement of the stand would have a positive benefit on the local economy. The conclusions of a detailed economic assessment is that development would contribute up to £804 million to local economy by 2034, and it would create an additional 364 full-time jobs above existing baseline condition. These economic benefits weigh significantly in favour of the proposed development. Now, I'd like to move on to developer contributions. Now, the type and amount of contributions that have been agreed and have been sought are in the end of the committee report in the table. Now, in relation to the replacement stand, all the contributions that have been sought have been agreed. Around £1.5 million to be paid to the County Council, and £150,000 would be paid to Nottingham City Council for junction improvements, bus service improvements, parking permits, and highway safety improvements. Now, the contributions in relation to the residential part are much more complicated. The applicant submitted a viability assessment to demonstrate that development on its own would be unable to deliver any affordable housing, and there would only be £700,000 available to pay towards developer contributions. Now, this has been independently assessed and it's agreed with by all parties. Out of the £700,000, the applicant is only agreeable to paying £430,000 towards developer contributions, because they state that the economic benefits associated with the stand would greatly outweigh the shortfall in the contributions. If that were the case, contributions would be paid proportionally towards education, highways improvements, and NHS. That pretty much covers the what is proposed section. I'd like to move on to the planning merits of the proposals, and I'll try to keep this very brief. It's our responsibility to identify the benefits, any potential harm, then weigh them all up and come to a recommendation for members. And as Andrew says, generally, the more important the impact, the more weight should be attached to it. In this instance, the proposals raise numerous planning issues, both positive and negatively, against the development. So it's important that you consider all aspects in your decision making. In relation to the replacement stand, in terms of its design, it's acknowledged that the existing stand is outdated, lacks facilities that you'd usually expect of a modern day football club. The development plan policies provide support in principle for the development of a replacement stand. In terms of design, it's considered that the stand's been well considered in terms of design, and considerable attention has been given by the applicant to achieve the scale of development required in the tight urban environment. Nevertheless, the townscape impact in terms of its height is not insignificant. In terms of the proposed residential part, it would be a future reserved matter for the residential aspect, but what we would be considering at this stage is a 13-tower high residential block with commercial units at the bottom of it. The consideration of officers is on the balance of information received is considered that design of the replacement stand and the layout of the proposed residential apartments is acceptable and would comply with the design policy set out in both the development plan and NPPF. In addition, it's also considering that the design and access facilities of the plaza are also acceptable. In terms of highways and parking, it should be noted that the Highway Authority do not object to the proposals on the basis of the agreed contributions. However, it should be noted that the level of parking would be reduced. Parking for the stand would be reduced, and the level of parking, the spaces per unit for the proposed residential part, would be below what we'd be normally asking for. Now, the reason they don't object is because of the mitigation measures set out in the draft section 106 agreement, heads of terms, which is at the back of the report. On this basis, it's considered that both replacement stand and apartment building can be appropriately accessed, and the wider impact on parking highways can be mitigated through various highways and transport-related improvements that would be secured through the proper legal agreement process. In terms of amenity, of course, the replacement stand would be significantly taller and have a larger footprint. It's going to have a greater impact on those people living next to it. In terms of potential loss of sunlight and daylight, an assessment was made via computer model by the applicant that assessed all facing windows. And out of the 176 windows assessed, 162 would meet the minimum requirement for sunlight and daylight, and the remaining windows would have that wouldn't meet the minimum requirement would not be significantly affected. There'd be a marginal impact on those windows. In terms of overlooking, it's considered that the inherent design of the stand is to focus spectators inward and not outward to the residential properties. In terms of apartment buildings, consider that there would be 52 metres between the proposed building and Bridgeford House to the rear. And whilst there's no defined spacing standards for that size building within this council, it's considered that there would be a sufficient degree of separation to limit direct overlooking, and an adequate degree of privacy would be retained for existing and future residents. Now, notwithstanding that, it should be acknowledged that the building closest to, I think it's number 67 Rosemary Avenue, closest to the ground, is that right, 27? 27, irrespective of all the computer modelling, the development would have an overbearing impact on its occupiers. Without doubt it would, given its distance and proximity to it. Equally,
Could you just speak up?
right,
Sorry, Chairman, could you just repeat? I'm not quite sure. I didn't quite hear. Did you say it would or it wouldn't?
it would. So the computer model says it's not going to affect sunlight and daylight, but number 67, it's in close proximity to it. The building's much bigger, and it's more so the overbearing impact on residents rather than any technical measurement. And that needs to be considered as part of the wider planning balance. There's also a substation proposed alongside the the new entrance or the replacement gatehouse. We've got a plan for that. In terms of amenity, it's not considered of any harmful impact on neighbouring amenity, as it would only be separated by an existing wall there. And there'd be a noise condition requiring the noise level to be independently assessed and, if necessarily, restricted. In conclusion, it's considered that all amenity issues could be secured by condition and generally comply with the development plan policies. In terms of heritage, whilst there's no listed buildings on or close to the site, having regard to the provisions of paragraph 192 of the NPPF, it's important to make clear that the level of harm to the setting of any heritage asset would be so low that it could not exceed the less than substantial level of harm, and the public benefit of these proposals far outweigh any such harm. I was asked to read that part, sorry. In terms of viability and developer contributions as an assessment, as stated, the approach of this application is that the shortfall in developer contributions is outweighed by the economic benefit of the stand. That's the crux of the matter. Now, the applicant has agreed to pay £430,000 by way of mitigation for the residential development. And as mentioned, that would go towards education, health and highways improvements, including parking. We have addressed this matter carefully, and on balance of the evidence, it's concluded that the wider benefits associated with the proposal are so significant as to outweigh the under-delivery of the package of community benefits associated with the viability assessment. In particular, the position of the application site already provides good accessibility in indoor and outdoor leisure and recreation facilities in the immediate locality. In any event, the proposed Section 106 agreement would provide a cross-subsidy for the Peter Taylor stand, and this will assist in ensuring the ultimate delivery of the replacement stand. However, members should be aware that the economic contributions for the football-related elements would not necessarily, and in principle, produce monies that would address the deficit. So I wouldn't necessarily provide education space, wouldn't necessarily provide all the monies that the benefits of the stand would create, if that makes sense to you. The monies would be significant, but wouldn't necessarily go straight into education. And that's something that has to be considered in the planning balance. I'd just like to move on to the boathouse situation. This is discussions that's been going on for a very long time. And our conclusions basically is if we could secure the replacement of the boathouse by a legal agreement and have no demolition of that, that is an acceptable approach to make to comply with the relevant policy of the development plan. There's just a couple of other technical matters before I start summing up for you. In terms of flood risk, I need to state that from regard to paragraph 161 of the NPPF, a sequential approach has been undertaken, and we've taken all accounts of flood risk and potential future impact of climate change and come to the conclusion that the location is acceptable. And other matters in relation to air quality, biodiversity, waste management are considered acceptable as proposed and can be secured and managed by the recommended package of conditions. So I'd just like to sum up eventually, if you're still with me. The overall proposal is a strategically important application resulting in significantly improved sports facilities for a variety of users in the immediate and wider locality. In terms of the benefits, it would provide obviously a financially secure club, provisions of new apartments, new employment opportunities, new investment and spending in the area, the opportunity to secure and enhance the community work undertaken by Nottingham Forest. In combination with all these factors, it's our opinion that these matters provide significant public benefit which cumulatively outweigh the harm which would be generated by the proposed development. Therefore, taking all these matters into account and balancing the social, environmental and economic benefits that would arise from the proposed development and the residual harm, it's recommended that planning permission be granted, subject to a series of planning conditions and the signing of a satisfactory 106 agreement. A legal agreement would be required to secure the delivery of the replacement stand, to ensure the replacement of the boathouse, and to deliver other mitigation, including the agreed package of developer contributions. That's almost it for me, but I just need to state that there's also been a number of late representations made, and all of those late representations have been considered, but they're already addressed in the committee report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Miles. And yes, we are still with you. There's an awful lot of information to go through there. So thank you very much for that. So, Mr. Ashcroft, if you could just give us the update on the late representations, please.
Chairman, thank you. As the case officer has said, what you see here is slightly more than you would normally see, but inevitably there's been some degree of ongoing discussions between the applicant and officers, and as such we've responded to some comments that have been received both from the applicant and from some local residents. And we've further refined the package of conditions. Effectively, the substance don't change, but they just give us a further degree of refinement and control over the scale and the nature of the development itself. Chairman, there's just one particular error that I'd just like to highlight to committee to assist in your judgment, and it's an error that's been generated by effectively the conservation team within the council. It's an inadvertent one, but if you look at the summary on page 5 of the schedule of late representations, where our conservation colleagues have very helpfully given you a description of effectively the boathouse that would be proposed to be lost as part of the development, and set out some very useful information about its potential to be considered as a non-designated heritage asset. And non-designated heritage assets are important factors, and indeed paragraph 2 or 3 of the MPPF highlights their importance. Plainly you won't be able to count them, but I counted them earlier. If you go down to line 17 on page 5, the officer there tries to identify balancing the merits of this facility as a non-designated asset against the wider benefits that would accrue from the scheme. There is a rogue knot in the middle of line 17. So in other words, what that sentence should say, if I read it from the beginning, it starts in about line 15. Whilst its loss is justified, i.e. its loss being the Britannia building, and it is considered that a balanced judgment should conclude that the benefits of the wider proposals would outweigh the level of harm, in other words, loss, to this relatively modest non-designated heritage asset, following the application of the balance required by paragraph 2 or 3. Members, I just wanted to clarify that issue. So in other words, what your conservation officer is saying is that the demolition of this non-designated heritage asset would be appropriate within the context of the MPPF. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you. And yes, that's on the late representation sheets that we've got on page 5 of that. So, right, now we have the opportunity for guest speakers at our committee meetings, and we're at that point now. We have 2 speakers who have registered to speak. One person who is speaking against the application, and another person who is speaking on behalf of the applicant. The way it works is speakers for this application have up to 9 minutes to address the committee. You don't have to use all those 9 minutes, but should you need 9 minutes, you have up to 9 minutes to talk to us. And there will also then be opportunity for members of the committee to ask questions or more to confirm points of clarification. It won't be a debate, it won't be a two-way conversation between members and the speaker, but if a speaker has said something that perhaps a member needs a little just to confirm or a bit more information, there will be that opportunity. So the first speaker today is an objector, Mr. Michael Dibala. Sorry, Dibali, right, thank you. And so if you come to the chair there. And I don't know whether you've been told this, but the way it works is as soon as you're ready to start speaking to us, press the right-hand button on the microphone, red light will come on. You'll have up to 9 minutes to speak to us. When you've got 30, if you're still speaking after 8 minutes, 30 seconds, we'll tell you that you've got 30 seconds left to continue. So the floor is yours as soon as you're ready. Thank you.
Firstly, I think I would like to thank the council, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to speak during this very important planning application meeting, and also to place my point on record as well in terms of the point I wish to raise. And the point I wish to raise is regarding a major concern that I have around the proposed increase in capacity of the ground by almost 30% on its current size. And with that, the impact and the constraints placed on the current infrastructure surrounding the ground, particularly on the exit to the ground, which in my opinion is already fully stretched and has no further headroom without potential consequences. The increase in capacity will, in my view, exacerbate the issue further that we currently have. Given the location of the city ground in relation to the geography of the city, it is no surprise that most of Nottingham is north of the River Trent. There are only two immediate access points back to the city and the most areas after the game, and that is via Trent Bridge or Lady Bay Bridge. It is a safe working assumption that the majority of the crowd will access those 2 points. Access to Trent Bridge is to walk from the ground along Trent Side North to reach the bridge, which in distance is approximately 200 yards. But it can take 20-25 minutes on match days to actually achieve that journey at less than very slow walking pace in a crowded crush. Access to the Lady Bay Bridge is a walk to the ground, from the ground in the opposite direction to the steps of the Lady Bay Bridge, which in my judgment, steps are about 4 abreast, with a small tarmac funnel base leading to the steps. And I've actually seen many people on many occasions scrambling up the banks, the side of the steps, to try and avoid queuing significant time at the base of the steps. Neither of these are civilized exits from the ground, and it's no surprise that people leave the ground early to avoid congestion, but they shouldn't have to do that. Walking either direction is one of the most unpleasant experiences, and from a health and safety point, equally very concerning regarding the crushing that takes place. Both of these have heavily congested pinch points that are neither adequately crowd flow managed or that the current infrastructure can accommodate safely, and I feel both of these are unacceptable. Apart from the steps at Lady Bay Bridge, the infrastructure has been around and unchanged as long as I can remember, and that is for more than 60 years. Yet health and safety legislation and people's expectations since then have well changed. Wouldn't it be fitting to have a beautiful corniche on the banks of the Trent at the point and then complement the state-of-the-art stadium and accommodate the supporters in a safe and pleasant way? My question to the council is, what health and safety assessment has taken place during the planning application process regarding the issues I've raised? And what conclusions have been reached as a result of those assessments? In my view, do nothing as an option, in my view, is not relative, as I believe the council has a duty of care for those during and in these circumstances while exiting the ground. So what are the council going to do to address the points I've raised, if anything? And that's my point.
Okay, well, thank you very much. We're not able to sort of engage in discussion as such, but you're well within your 9 minutes there anyway. So thank you for that. Excuse me. Do any members have any questions, points of clarification? Councillor Clark. So Councillor Clark, we'll just check with you something you said. So Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, just wanted to check. You made a statement that it was, if I've heard you correctly, that it was alleged to be a 30% increase in the
Almost.
capacity of the ground. My understanding is it is an increase of 5,000 on approximately 30,000, which is about 15 odd %. So I just wanted to clarify, on what do you base your assertion that it's a 30% increase?
I was going by the actual figures that I've seen, which is a capacity of up to 38,000. However, the crowd maximum was about 29, most of them is match days. So it was almost, I said, almost 30%.
Okay, thank you. Do you want to come in on that, Mr. Ashcroft, or?
Yeah. Chairman, if I can just clarify the figures, the existing capacity of the ground is just over 30,000, and the capacity of the new ground with the replacement Peter's Taylor stand would be just over 35,000. So the increase would be around 5,000 people. Chairman, I haven't got a calculator to work out what the percentages are, but those are the facts. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Clark. Does anyone else have any points of clarification for Mr. Badali? No. Okay. Thank you very much. We heard you clearly, so you can relax. Well, sort of relax now and back there. So our second speaker, our guest speaker, is Mr. Chris Potts, who is from the agents for the applicant. So again, it's a little bit like Mastermind, isn't it? You'll have up to 9 minutes to speak to us, and as soon as you're ready, press the right-hand button. The red light will come on, and the clock will start counting down. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair, members. My name is Chris Potts. I'm a director of Savills. I'm a planning consultant. For much of the last 20 years, I've been involved in sports projects. So it's new stadia, redeveloped stadia, London 2012, Rugby World Cup 2015, and so on. I've been working with Nottingham Forest Football Club for about 3.5 years. We had a first conversation about upgrading the Peter Taylor stand and the best way of securing planning in a financially viable way. Probably important just to say a few points of context about the football club. Incredibly proud history, champions of English football, champions of Europe, inaugural member of the Premier League. You know all of this, but there's a very clear ambition under the current owner to take that obligation that they have to the city and supporters to regain that status. What's very clear in sport at the moment is the investment in infrastructure has been very significant. You see new stadia, Arsenal, Tottenham, redeveloped parts of stadia, Liverpool, Newcastle. What they all have in common is they're in complex urban areas, and therefore the issues they create and the problems you've got to solve require a real coalition of stakeholders to make them succeed. And that's no exception here, as officers have explained. The brief we had from the club for the Peter Taylor stand to increase capacity, you've heard, increase the quality of facilities, reference to hospitality, but also conferencing, more use by community, stunning architecture. And on that point, the club have engaged international design firm Benoit, who are headquartered nearby in Newark. So they know the club, they know the stand, they know the supporters. And finally, to make sure that the new stand could be delivered in a way that doesn't compromise the rest of the city ground, which clearly has to continue to function. It's probably worth saying, because I was there at the beginning of the journey 3.5 years ago with officers, there were some very good principles agreed in the early pre-application stage. We agreed that we'd approach it in a comprehensive way. So the stand and the residential and all of the issues would be looked at in great amount of detail. It was also acknowledged that the housing element would provide a subsidy towards the stand. And again, that was recognised as being important. And I suppose the third principle we agreed at the beginning was consultation and communication. So there was a lot of pre-application consultation, consultation after submission, and every time the scheme's been updated, the Borough Council have held to that principle and reconsulted and taken the new information back to members. So there's certainly been a commitment to dialogue as far as that's concerned. Some of you may have attended the consultation events late 2019. I did. The two issues I took away, huge supporter enthusiasm, but as with all supporters, scepticism until they see it, they don't believe it. The enthusiasm's still there. Get the permission that we're seeking now will certainly help in their belief, and also transport to make sure the additional supporters we're seeking to attract can arrive by as many active travel modes as possible. The planning application has been on quite a journey, as we've mentioned already. We submitted this at the end of 2019 with a comprehensive suite of documents. I mean, the officers digested those, gave feedback. In March 2020, the project and everything else was impacted by the pandemic. The club's focus became naturally on one of financial stability and the well-being of its staff. This project was largely placed on hold because it just wasn't a priority. And I have to say the Borough Council officers were incredibly patient and understanding in that period, because we just certainly weren't able to commit the time and effort at that stage. There were greater priorities the club was facing. When the application did restart, the two main issues I think that really took a lot of attention were around the housing. And we had a healthy discussion and disagreement on areas about the scale and bulk and massing. We felt the building was attractive and would be a real landmark. Officers and other consultees had reservations. So we listened. We revised both the heights and scale and the number of residential units in response to that. The other main issue to arise was transport. And we spent a lot of time with the county going through all of their transport requirements. What would the impacts, what should the mitigation be, and when would the triggers arise through that? So the application's been on quite a journey, and as officers already indicated, we've been very thoroughly tested at a granular level, as the officers have explained in the presentation. So where are we now? You've heard a summary from the officers, and just from our perspective on behalf of the football club, we're at a key moment in the delivery of the Peter Taylor stand. If we can secure your support today to follow the recommendation, there's a real prospect of delivering a key piece of sporting infrastructure. It's great for the club, but it's great for the borough, the city, and wider. So that sense of pride, I think, will be very important. We're going to create some placemaking. The master planning that's gone into the project has been significant. The architecture is fantastic, and officers have explained the importance of the spaces around the building. So this new plaza will be created. We've reached agreement with the boat club, who remain very supportive, and we're in discussions on how that will play out, and has been indicated that's subject to the legal agreement. We've also had an updated economic study undertaken. When we submitted the application, the economic case was quite compelling. Having gone back and rerun the figures, it's even more so. The officers have set out in the report the number of jobs and the impact of the investment. And I think they're concluding there's 344, I think I read, net additional permanent jobs that will come out of the project, which is very significant. I think there's 19 million at GVA spend per annum. And I think officers have aggregated that over the 10-year figure to 800 million plus. So these are very, very significant economic dividends from the project. We're also delivering some housing. 170 houses shouldn't be forgotten as a contribution to the borough's requirements in a great location served by public transport. On the subject of transport, we spent a lot of time with the county on the Section 106 requirements. They've been agreed. There's a suite of measures relating to buses, traffic regulation orders, match day permits, looking at certain junctions, contributions to cycle and footpaths. So there's a whole suite of contributions that the county council and ourselves have agreed, and payment of those. Being a planner, I need to bring my comments to an end on planning policy, and Mr. Ashcroft started there. This is a complicated scheme. It raises a plethora of issues, but the report indicates there's an incredible amount of compliance with your own policies. Looking through the report, it does stress test every issue against your policies, and we score very well. I'm also duty bound to mention the national planning policy framework, and again, the promotion there of economic growth, new homes, and sporting and cultural infrastructure is important. So in conclusion, we've been on a long journey. We've worked very carefully and closely with officers. We're delighted with the recommendation, and on behalf of the football club, we would trust and hope the committee can support that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mr. Potts. Just within your 9 minutes, so thank you for that. Members of the committee, any points of clarification? Councillor Thomas, please.
Yes, could I just ask, please, of the contributions secured by highways and so on, do any of them address the pedestrian congestion issues highlighted by the speaker before you?
Okay, can I? Yeah, thank you. The pedestrian routes in all exits really from the stadium in all directions have been looked at very carefully by not just the county, but obviously the borough as well, and the city when we cross the river. And certainly contributions have been made towards those as requested. So yes.
Thank you. Does that help?
I was specifically asking about Trentside North, really, along the river, because I think that was the area highlighted. So what changes are proposed there?
Sorry. The committee report explains that there's a contribution, financial contribution towards the Trentside, both in terms of cycle and pedestrian routes. Probably also worth saying that the issue of spectator movement is something that is looked at in a great deal of detail by Blue Light Services, the club, and authorities to make sure that spectators can access and leave the stadium in a safe way. And there's a lot of learning takes place around sporting events to make sure that happens.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Any other points of clarification for Mr. Potts? Councillor Price.
Yeah, just to pick up on the point that you made about sorry.
To the side because it is by the laptop.
Yeah, is that better? Thanks. Just to pick up on the point about 344 net additional jobs that will come out of this development. Are those additional jobs solely attributed to this development, or is that in combination with the promotion of Premier League?
Yeah, the updated economic study looked at 4 scenarios. So Championship, no new stand and with stand. Premier League, no stand with stand. And the 344, which I have, that's the Premier League with the stand.
Councillor Price, is that helpful, or would you like to come back?
Yeah, so do you have a breakdown within that says of those 344, X number would be as a consequence of Premier League, and X number would be as a consequence of this new stand redevelopment?
Sorry, pardon me. Sorry, I missed the.
Yes, can you just speak up again? It's a bit hard. Be brave. Speak loud.
I can give you the figure in a Championship scenario. If that's so. Looking at the table, it says 292 net additional permanent jobs, and that's a Championship scenario with a stand. We prefer the Premier League scenario, and we're looking forward to the season.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other points of clarification? So no other hands going up. So thank you, Mr. Potts. If you could just turn the microphone off, that would be really appreciated. And you're welcome to go back to sit in the comfy seats. Thank you. So, members, we're now at the point now where we need to discuss and debate and come to a decision, and which is just like any other planning application that we discuss at these meetings. If I could just sort of maybe suggest, if somebody has already asked a question on a particular question, I know it's sometimes tempting to ask the same question again, but perhaps it's worth keeping that in mind. But I'm not saying you can't ask questions, but I'm just thinking of time and all the rest of it. So we've had a very detailed presentation from the officers. We've heard from the member of the public and the applicant who are making their respective points. Does anyone have any comments or questions? Who would like to go first? So, Councillor Thomas, thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Obviously, there's a lot to be welcomed in this application, and it is very complex, but there are some concerns popping up, really. My questions initially are mostly about the residential part of the development, and in particular, the lack of provision of affordable housing and how the adverse impacts of the residential block are to be mitigated. Obviously, it's been said already that the usual way to do this is by means of developer contributions. And looking at paragraphs 364 onwards of the officer report, £1.1 million of contributions were requested, but the viability assessment concluded that only 700,000 should be made available. The applicant is proposing to contribute just 430,000, with 270,000 retained as a contribution towards the shortfall in funding for the stand. To my mind, this isn't acceptable. It means that the homeless people of Rushcliffe are missing out on homes, and they're effectively subsidising the stand. In the overall cost of the project, £270,000 is small change, but it could provide homes for perhaps 2 or 3 households. So before we vote on the recommendation, I propose that it is amended to include the requirement that the £700,000 contribution be paid in full. And for my mind, this should be for affordable housing for social rent to be provided on site within the residential block to at least the value of £270,000. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. Can you just confirm again which paragraph you were referring to? Was it
364 onwards.
364 onwards, right. So we've got the question there, a query about the viability and the affordable homes aspect. Can you help us out with that, please, Mr. Ashcroft?
Chairman, I'll start. The case officer might need to fill in some of the details. But plainly, as Mr. Potts has explained, this has been a long journey. And effectively, officers have sought to secure effectively the best outcome that we can, both for the club and for the community as a whole. I think the fundamental issue here is the viability assessment. Because this is a complicated scheme, and because, as you've heard, there's a degree of cross-subsidisation between the two elements of the scheme. The total, or the maximum amount of funding that would be available for community benefits is £700,000. We haven't simply relied on the applicant for that figure, but that has been independently assessed and has been agreed. So effectively, that is a starting point. And that is the starting point because national policy is very clear that viability is important. Developers do not develop things that are not viable to develop. And therefore, effectively, that becomes the starting point. You've heard the debate, you've seen the report, you've heard what Mr. Potts has said. The club take the view that it is willing to make the contributions up to a certain level, and up to that level, we have, as best we can, agreed with the club and the providers of the community services how that money should be spent. Effectively, we're potentially here back to basics, that you are expected and required to determine the application as it is and on its merits, rather than seek to determine an alternative type of planning application. And Chairman, it's on that basis that your officers have sought to secure the best use of that money that has been made available. And it's on that basis, Chairman, that a significant proportion of that money goes to contributions towards schools and educational facilities that directly arise from the flats. And plainly, that is an important issue. I think we would all value the importance of education to the future of the borough. So that is there, and the amount of money that has been apportioned to that has been agreed with the County Council. The second element is for this complicated process of car parking permits, where plainly there is a sustainable way of ensuring that the car parking is appropriate, whilst safeguarding the existing parking that local residents enjoy within their own streets. So that's other elements of the money have been apportioned to that. Chairman, the significance of the scale of affordable housing shouldn't be lost. The dilemma here is that affordable housing is expensive, and affordable housing is expensive to deliver. Also, invite members to bear in mind here, as the case officer explained, that the majority of the flats are relatively modest and small units. That's not to suggest they would be affordable to certain people, but by definition, they will be smaller and therefore less expensive to purchase. So we've tried to balance that within the round. Chairman, hopefully that helps at the high level. I don't know whether Mr. Miles wants to comment in any greater details. No, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ashcroft. So, yes, I mean, we have the application as it is in front of us, and quite a clear explanation, I think, there of the viability issues and discussions that have taken place. Right, I've got Councillor Clark next, indicated to speak.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I need to ask for your slight indulgence and a certain amount of latitude, because the agenda paper, which I've made an awful lot of notes on, are now a pile of ashes as of 3 hours ago. And so I'm now trying to desperately catch up and remember all the things that I was going to be highlighting on this fresh agenda, which I was given just before the meeting. As we all know, pretty obvious statement, it is a very large application, and it is a substantial application that has many benefits, as we've heard, but also we must take into account that it has impacts on other people as well, principally the neighbouring residents and businesses and people close to hand. So there are, quite a few issues which I think that do need resolving. It is very much an iconic site, as we know, and obviously the benefits associated with this application will be substantial. And I have to say, I am minded at the moment, subject to hearing the rest of the debate, to support the application, provided that some of the concerns that I have are actually addressed and that I am reassured by the responses. Firstly, principally, and I did give notice I was going to ask this question previously, relating to the parking provision and the residential tower, this is obviously a departure from the standard parking standards which would normally be required, and therefore has that actually been advertised as a departure, and has that departure actually been addressed? Because if you link that with parking permits, and perhaps this is where we may need a little bit of clarification, that parking permits, there are probably 3 different types. There are parking permits for the new residents of the residential tower. There's parking for people associated with the club, and there are parking permits already in existence around the neighbouring streets. So I think it's important that we get clear clarification as to when we talk about parking permits, that we are clear to whom those permits are benefiting. The pedestrian traffic issues, certainly I'd be interested to know what the actual assessment was in terms of the Lady Bay Bridge, and whether in fact contributions were considered to improve the structure of the Lady Bay Bridge in order to accommodate a greater number of pedestrians. I suppose I was going to say leaving the club, but obviously approaching the club as well. In terms of, and I think it was Mr. Miles who mentioned privacy, and that privacy needs to be, I think I'm quoting him correctly, but forgive me if I'm not quite correct. I think he said that the privacy needs to be mitigated. So my question is, how is that privacy going to be mitigated in relation to the overlooking of neighbouring houses? There are conditions in that relate to flood evacuation, but I'm also interested in actual flood mitigation measures included within the structure of the residential tower. Now, is that detailed matter? Are they detailed matters that are still to be addressed at a final detailed stage, or do we need to address that now because there is potentially an underground car park, but notwithstanding that, the flood mitigation and flood prevention of the actual tower itself. The grant somewhere, and I did have a note of the page numbers until they were burnt. Somewhere it mentions the Grantham Canal, and I noticed, I remember that it said that the Canals and River Trust had no comment, but that elsewhere it asked for a contribution towards Grantham Canal improvements in relation to the Environment Agency ownership of that particular section of the canal. So I just wondered whether any discussion has taken place regarding contributions towards that environmental asset. Can I have some clarification on the £430,000 mitigation, which was mentioned by one of the officers? And then I think my final one is going to be in relation to community use. It mentions several times in the narrative community use. So how is this actually going to be accessed in practice? Because it talks about some of the facilities being available for event hire, etc. And then it says, and community use. So I'm just interested to know in practical or in real terms, in practical terms, what does that community use entail? So I suppose those are the queries, Chairman. Just make a comment that obviously they are substantial buildings, but in the context of neighbouring buildings, the old Civic Centre, I think, is it called Bridgewood House now, whatever it's now called. So there's that, there's the current or existing stadium buildings, which will still going to be retained. And of course, over the road, you have a fairly substantial building for the cricket ground as well. So there are substantial buildings. So I think in the context of those substantial buildings, and indeed on the north, well, I call it the North Bank, I think it's the Northwest Bank, isn't it? On the City Bank, there are substantial buildings now being created on that side as well. So I think in that context, this proposal will very much complement those other substantial buildings in the area. However, before I would be tempted to move the recommendation, I would like clarification of those points to help address my concerns. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. And yes, I did allow you to indulge in time there because I was there as well when your report went up in flames. So I understand completely. So Councillor Clark has raised some important points there. He's pointed out the advantages and disadvantages of the application, but in particular, to start with parking issues, which I think is covered from paragraph 246 onwards in the report permits, but we'll get a little bit of confirmation on that. And then the other concerns of the pedestrian access and the privacy, flooding matters, and also the query about the Grantham Canal and the community use. Something rings a bell when the community use. I think there was reference to, for example, Scouts on St George's Day comes to mind. But we'll anyway, Mr. Ashcroft, can you pick up on those points, please?
Chairman, yes, indeed. Either myself or Mr. Miles, the case officer, will try and give you whatever assurance you need on these issues. I'll try and pick off the ones that I can answer and give Mr. Miles and Mr. Cook time to think on some of the others. In terms of your first question about has the council considered or advertised this proposal as a departure from the development plan? Chairman, the short answer to that is no. Both no in terms of when the application first came in, and also we didn't consider the need to do so once the application was amended during the course of the lifetime of the application. And there are effectively two fundamental reasons for that. The first is that assessment is an assessment of the impact of this development on the development plan as a whole. And we've tried to make that assessment and are comfortable in that assessment. And actually, if you look at the details, there are two fundamental elements. First of all is the replacement stand, and the second is the new residential units. Plainly, the replacement stand is a replacement of an existing stand, and we feel is entirely compatible and in conformity with the overall intention of the development plan. The second one, the residential units, plainly we're in a tightly built up urban area. This is brownfield land, and it's entirely the type of place where you might expect a positive redevelopment of the site for residential units. Chairman, I can also confirm that the application has been extensively advertised, generally because of the scale and the nature of the application. Chairman, if you strip away the purpose of the legislation that requires potentially applications to be advertised as departures from the development plan, for example, an application in the Greenbelt for 400 houses would plainly be a departure from the development plan. The primary purpose of that is to allow and alert people to understand the nature of it, and where they think necessary, to invite the Secretary of State to call in the application to be determined nationally. Clearly, that hasn't happened. People know about the application, and indeed the government's view is that applications should be determined by local members such as yourselves. So hopefully that gives you the reassurance on that matter of process. Chairman, secondly, in terms of the pinch points on the existing bridges, plainly I think pinch points is always going to be a situation with football grounds where by definition you get 30,000 people arriving at a single place within a period of an hour to an hour and a half and then similarly leaving. What it is not Forest's responsibility here is to solve an existing problem. We're just looking at the added number of people that will be coming because of the extended nature of the stand. And Chairman, there have been very significant discussions with both highways authorities, with Nottinghamshire County Council, effectively south of the river, and Nottingham City to the north of the river. And both councils, both highway authorities, are comfortable that there are appropriate mitigation measures that are being taken by Forest, both within the ground and certainly within the surrounding highway. Plainly, there will inevitably be pinch points because the planning process can't control how people arrive or depart from a football ground. But all those safety measures are in place. Chairman, if I can go back to Councillor Clark's issue about the community benefits package. just to reinforce to members that inevitably that package is driven by the viability assessment. In simple terms, there simply isn't enough cake to go round, and there's not enough cake for people to get the type of slice that they would normally get. And therefore, it's about how best we balance this out. Chairman, what we have sought to do in terms of the available money is to mitigate the issues that appear to be most obviously arising from the development. As I said earlier, the need for schools will always arise because of the flats. The need for the parking permit arrangements for existing local residents in existing streets will arise. And if that didn't arise, then there would be those inevitable pressures from the owners or occupiers of the new residential units. And that would put unnecessary stress on those local residential streets. And also what we've tried to do is to build in an element in terms of contributions of an unallocated site to the provision of health facilities. So, Chairman, those are what we appear to be the appropriate balances here. Some of the issues that would normally come forward if the viability existed would be for recreation and open space. But I think, Chairman, we are satisfied, given the location of the city ground, given the access to the River Trent, given the access to existing recreation facilities, both to the north and to the south of the river, we are comfortable that those are less important than the issues on which we have sought to focus with the agreement of the applicant where those funding should be going. Would you like me to try and comment on parking? Yes, or I don't know whether Mr. Miles is ready to comment.
I think the parking query in terms of the pressure of parking, the permits, and the different groups and people who will be affected or potentially affected. So yes, if you could pick up on that, please.
Thank you, Chairman. So the parking ratio is well below what's normally accepted by the County Council. The idea of the applicant is to mitigate through permit parking. Now, the permit parking would stop future residents of the residential block parking on any adjoining street. So that would mean additional permit parking for Fox Road and Radcliffe Road. Radcliffe Road, yeah, Radcliffe Road. In addition to what's already permitted. So it's almost extending the permit area around the application site so that people who do have cars don't park on existing spaces in front of people's houses. Is the bottom line of that. The Highway Authority acknowledged the updated transportation assessment, which basically considered traffic flows. The other important mitigation was the imposition of a travel plan, which promoted sustainable transport measures and ensuring that future residents are aware of those prior to purchase, if planning permission is granted. Also recognition, as Andrew says, of the location of the site. It's a well-located, sustainable site within an urban area with services close to the site within walking distance and well served by existing bus routes. So that has been acknowledged by the Highway Authority, and that's one of the many reasons why they've accepted a reduction in overall parking levels. A couple other points. The community aspect that Andrew touched on. Nottingham Forest run are a part of Nottingham Forest Community Trust, which occupy part of the ground at the moment, and that would be incorporated into the new development. And the Community Trust, as far as I'm aware, operate a lot of community services in terms of helping the community with food banks and providing the hire of accommodation for next to no charge, and also the sport and leisure facilities that they organise on behalf of the Community Trust. A couple of questions that you raised, the 430,000, what is it? That should be at the back of your report, but I'll summarise it briefly. Basically, a large proportion of the contributions would go towards education provision. Smaller proportion would go towards permit parking and traffic regulation orders, as discussed. and a small proportion of that would go towards NHS provision. In terms of Grantham Canal, there is contributions from the stand going towards Grantham Canal in terms of providing cycle path alongside of that and improvements to it. In terms of the flood mitigation question, the residential part of the proposals would be on the second floor. The residential part would be on the second floor. We're actually ground floor, first floor, third floor, so we're actually on the third floor of the tower block. And there's a condition requiring no residential development below that level. I think I've covered most of the questions.
Okay, I'll let Councillor Clark come back because I can tell you are anxious to come back on this. And in fairness, there were a lot of points you raised, and we've heard a lot of replies and answers there as well. I hope they were helpful. So I'll come back to you, Councillor Clark.
Just on one, Chairman, the parking permits. Did I hear you correctly that you're including Radcliffe Road for parking permits? So that has an immediate impact on the businesses and on people stopping and trading on the businesses along Radcliffe Road.
Well, yes. So if you could clarify that, I'm just looking at paragraph 246 on page 48. Does actually say that it refers to Fox Road and Radcliffe Road. So perhaps just a bit of clarification on that.
Yeah, that's correct, Councillor, and that's purely at the request of the Highway Authority.
Do you want to come back, or you want to sit back?
I'd better not. I don't think,
Right.
Chairman.
Okay.
But I might have words in on another occasion.
Righty-ho, that's for another place. So if the other questions answered the answers answered your questions. Good, thank you. So my next speaker on the list is Councillor Mason, please.
Hi, thank you. We were talking about pedestrians, but also cyclists. I wondered what the access and whether there'd been contributions towards and the access to the new bridge that is going over the River Trent for cycles and pedestrians. I think it's about 100 metres further downriver. And I wondered if that had been taken into consideration, because that should help to relieve some of the pinch points, perhaps, maybe. So I would like to know about that. Also, I expect noise and construction will be in the next stage, will it be, of the planning for the, or will it be in with the actual stand?
We'll get clarification. So noise mitigation during construction, yes. That's what you're thinking, isn't it? Both for the stand and the potential residentials as well.
More or less for the whole site.
Yeah. Well, we'll get an answer.
Is that looked at in this part of it?
Right, good question. And then your other question is just really any possible link or contribution to the
yes, or whether there has been already.
Yes.
And I can't quite see how they will get from there to the new bridge either. So I would just be interested in that.
Okay, thank you. Who's picking up on that? Yep.
Well, I think the first point to make is that is beyond the application site, but nevertheless, from our discussions with the club, there is plans to link this application site into that new bridge, which would help to alleviate the problems that the gentleman raised as a public objector. But there's no funds requested as such directly for that. And it doesn't form part of the application site, so that's not been included in this application. But I think there is plans to link that in.
Yeah, I suppose I was just interested in knowing how people would get, and that it would be clearly signposted and made easy to access. Thank you.
I think Mr. Ashcroft might have an answer to that one.
I think it's a really good point, because effectively the new bridge, once it comes, will effectively be a bonus to the existing situation. There are no direct contributions being made by Forest, because at the time the application was submitted and being considered, that bridge was fully funded, and therefore it will be unfair to expect Forest to fund something that's already funded. But plainly, once it comes in, it will be entirely compatible with the broader proposal.
Yes, yeah, please do.
Yeah, Councillor, just an answer to the other question. Okay, forgot about, sorry, was there's a requirement for a construction and environmental management plan, so proper measures in place to limit amenity during construction. That's in the condition.
So yes, there is a condition for noise during construction, which you would expect anyway, but it's good to know that it is there. So I hope that that helps. Okay, my next speaker is Councillor Stockwood, please.
Thank you, Chairman. By comparison, my points may not be as relevant as others, but I am most concerned about the Japanese knotweed. It's becoming a national problem, and there's two sites here. One is behind the boathouse for demolition, and we don't know where the other one is. It isn't in the report as such. They do need dealing with. Certain towns have become hotspots for it, and I would hate for West Bridgeford, Lady Bay, and the surrounding area to be included in that. So if there isn't any mitigation of that, I'd like it putting forward. The other is, yes, a boathouse is being demolished. I've looked at the plans, and I can understand the hesitancy of the applicant as to where he's going to put the new boathouse, but it doesn't seem to me that there's any viable proposition nearby. So it may have to jump the river, well, over the bridge anyway, not jump the river, and go the county council side. But that's a minor point, but I would like to have had more detail on that as well. I know perhaps there's been a lot of conversation about it, but both of them are important points to me. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, talking of the boathouse, I mean, it's quite detailed quite a lot in the report that there has been a lot of discussion between the applicant and the boat clubs, reading it, it says there is agreement. But yes, do we have any further information about the boat club future and where? And also, I'm assuming, I'm sure you'll correct me or confirm or otherwise, but if and when the new boat club appears, it will come as a separate planning application, I assume, or am I right in that or wrong? And then the question about the knotweed, Japanese knotweed as well, which I must admit is something I hadn't thought of. But so what can we do about those two, please?
I'll pick up on the knotweed, Japanese knotweed one. We did recognise that, and we've got a condition as part of the construction environmental management plan that must be mitigated for prior to any demolition or construction. Okay. Okay, Chair, I'll pass over to Andrew for the next question.
Yes, so do you want to come in, Andrew, on the boat club arrangements and what if, etc.?
Indeed. Chairman, thank you. As plainly, as you've heard, the boathouse has always been a considerably significant part of the scheme. Plainly, its loss opens up the entrance to the plaza and it significantly enhanced access onto Trentside North. I think it would have been nice to have been able to bring to you this afternoon a very detailed proposal, but plainly that isn't the case. Again, as part of the training that we've had, you will understand that some things are not at this stage directly planning matters, and there are ongoing discussions that are taking place between the freeholders of the site at Nottingham Forest and the boathouse in order to secure an alternative site. So effectively, the proposal now is that effectively the demolitions cannot commence until such time as an alternative site has been located. So I think Forest acknowledge that the risk lies with them, that effectively that process does need to be solved. Plainly, a detailed application will need to come to this council in order to take a decision on that process. So effectively, you've got the controls there, and Forest recognise the importance of securing an alternative site. It's just that at this stage, you don't have the details, but you still retain the control. Thank you, Chairman.
And also it's significant, isn't it, that there is considerable reference to the legal agreement between the club and the boat club, and that it's a crucial part of the whole application.
Absolutely.
Yes, okay. Is that helpful, Councillor Stockwell?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Next speaker on the list is Councillor Healy, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just basically on the new stand, I mean, I have to say, and I'm sure we'd all agree, it does look superb, looks fantastic. The enhanced facilities obviously will provide more jobs and opportunity for both local and wider communities. So lots of pluses with regards to that. We've touched briefly on the numbers, and forgive me for duplicating some of them if I am. The average attendance, I understand, is approximately 28,000. Our new stand is going to, with the new stand in place, the seating will increase to 35,500, which again is tremendous. Away fans, and if I've got this figure wrong, please clarify, but I understand away fans will have access to 10% of the seating capacity of the stadium. A reasonable assumption, I think, is that the majority hopefully will use transport to get here, be it trains, buses, trams, etc., etc. And of course, the access to the stadium is straightforward, simple, half an hour walk possibly from the bus station. But we mustn't forget for a moment, people will drive, and we're back to something I think that has cropped up quite a bit with numerous speakers, and that is parking. And most of those have been aired and clarified. My question really is this: for many years, football parking was made available on Victoria Embankment. Now I know parts of that was closed some couple of years back for some sort of a trial, I understood at the time. And again, I understand that was going to be evaluated earlier this year, which I'm not aware it has. But, you know, it worked for parking then. Home matches, I think the Premier League offers a total of 25 matches, so 12, 13 home games. Has it been thought about at all to look again at the parking facility on the embankment, and even if it is peak parking on the home matches, you know, 12 to 6? So that's my first question. The other query I've got is the Pavilion Road access, and again, I think from a safety point of view, barriers were introduced. I think anti-terrorism gates, I think they're known as. Barriers were introduced to ensure that traffic did not turn into Pavilion Road. And I think at the same time, it caused a lot of aggravation, for want of a better word, with the residents, because whilst the barriers were closed and in place, then clearly they could not get in or out with their private cars. So I'd like to know, what is the plan there? Is that a feature that's going to stay for all the obvious reasons? And my third question, and I think Andrew probably has touched on it, I was just somewhat confused reading my notes about the boathouse. Am I right in thinking that that has to be demolished and replaced before the demolition of the stand takes place? Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Healy. Do you want to take that one first, the boathouse, just confirmation of what has to happen when, in relation to the new developments, just to make that clear?
Yeah, our approach all along has always been, if you're not providing the details for the replacement boathouse, that you need before you even think about knocking it down, you need to have in place replacement facilities that's operational before you even start knocking down that building, and that would be secured through a legal agreement.
So hopefully that helps with the boathouse. So we've got the questions about the car parking capacity and a query about the embankment. I know there's a reference to a travel plan or a travel coordinator in the report, isn't there? But do you want to pick up on, is that you, Andrew? Do you want to pick up on that, please?
Chairman, thank you. Plainly, there's still further work to be done, and I know that Forest are actively engaging with local landowners and other bodies to secure that broader package of car parking facilities. So plainly, those discussions will continue to take place, and no doubt the county will be heavily involved in terms of those discussions as the Section 106 agreement rolls out. Chairman, as we've heard, and you can see it in the ambition that Forest have. Their ambition is to encourage their supporters to come to the ground by sustainable travel means. And plainly, people will vote with their feet and potentially do what they want. But certainly, as the travel plan rolls out, there will be far greater opportunities for people to access the ground by alternative measures. But you're exactly right. Some of these ongoing measures that are being trialled will continue to be looked at in the future. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Is that helpful, Councillor Healy? Councillor Clark, were you wanting to come in on that? Because I saw you.
Only just to provide information on the question about the anti-terrorism barriers, Chairman, because I happen to have first-hand knowledge of that, and just for Councillor Healy and the committee's information, yes, they are anti-terrorism barriers, and there was some confusion initially that residents were not being allowed through. However, discussions took place and that was clarified, and with the existence of permits, then the residents who are resident within those barriers, they are then allowed through the barriers. So the issues that existed at the very beginning had been sorted out, and that's no longer an issue.
Thank you. Thank you for that knowledge. That's very helpful. And Councillor Healy. Right, I've got a couple more speakers listed on the list here. Councillor Bailey, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Potts, the agent for the applicant, told us that he had been in conversation with the officers since 2019. Now, when it became clear that it was not going to be viable to have affordable housing in the proposed tower block, was there any discussion at any stage with the officers that Forest might rein back their spending on this new strand to enable affordable houses to be built in the tower block? Because I have great reservations that 170 flats are likely to be built and not one affordable house or flat amongst them. And so really, there's a lot of money being spent here, but you cut your cloth according to your means. And if it became clear that it was not viable to have affordable housing, then surely there should have been some thought given to reining back their expenditure on the stand to enable this to happen for the citizens of Rushcliffe. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bailey. So we're back to the viability question and the discussions about the housing and affordable. So yes, who's picking up on that? Is that you, Andrew?
I'll have a go at that. I think it's a very good question in terms of how the scheme has worked its way through. If I go back to the opening comments, plainly the underpinning driver for this application is the replacement of the Peter Taylor stand, and in doing so, bringing it up to modern standards with all the facilities that are associated with the application. So that's the principal driver, and it's that has remained constant for Forest. As you heard from Mr. Potts, at some point during the life of the application, because of issues that had been raised both by your officers and by other organisations, the number of residential units was reduced. And therefore, by reducing the number of residential units, that plainly has had an impact on the overall viability. So it's clearly that reduction in the number of units has had an effect on the broader package. So I think again we're back to the point of considering this application on its merits. Forest have taken the decision that they have to reduce the number of residential units whilst maintaining, I think because of clear operational and financial reasons, the scale and the significance of the stand. Chairman, I hope that helps in terms of a description of how we've got to where we are.
I hope it does. I think so. There's also quite a lot of detail on the background to that from paragraph 364 onwards, which I know you've. Yes, I know you. I just really for other colleagues information on that. But does that help? The reply from Mr. Ashcroft. Right. Okay. Thank you. Right. Who's next on the list? Councillor Purdue-Horan, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've read this very comprehensive report, which has taken me days, and of course the late submissions. I have completely lost the train on the plots for Emmerdale and Coronation Street. They've gone out the window. And I came out with loads of questions. And I was filled with dread because I thought, again, as we've done in the past, we're going to be here till after midnight answering councillors' questions. So I'd like to thank the officers for coming up with the idea over a period of 2 days this week to take in technical questions from councillors and provide us all with, again, very comprehensive answers. So just for the record, you know, I'd like to acknowledge there have been loads of questions submitted by councillors before this meeting, and all of my questions have been comprehensively answered. So thank you, and thank you for the hard work clearly that has been put into this application by our officers, and indeed the site visits that or site visit that was arranged recently. And I take on board some of the concerns that have been raised, Mr. Chairman. And it's very easy for us to follow our guidelines when we are talking about housing developments, whether it's 30 or 3,000 or whatever. But this particular application, I think I fully accept, is, along with the Nottinghamshire County Cricket Ground, completely unique. And I'm happy to go along with the balance that has been struck by our officers. And so for that reason, I don't know if it's been seconded, but I'm happy to second the recommendation and the various conditions.
No, right. Well, thank you. Yes, I can tell you were plainly listening well to the conversation earlier on, and when Councillor Clark said he was minded, but he had, but the recommendation hasn't actually been moved yet. So, so that's good. So, are you actually you're moving the recommendation? Righty ho. Well, thank you. As per the report. And so, right, with that in mind, I need to ask Councillor Clark, are you about to tell me what I think you're about to tell me?
Well, I am, just with one little clarification. I am minded to second it, but I would just like one further little clarification about these parking permits, because if I could ask the officers, or everybody, to turn to page 90, condition number 42, in relation to the residential, where it states that an application for approval of the reserve matters must be made to the local planning authority. Is it at that stage that, in fact, further discussion or clarification could take place on these parking permits for residential on Ratcliffe Road? Because I am concerned on that an application elsewhere is impacting on somebody's making a living. So could parking permit discussions, are they part of that reserve matters for the residential rather than for now?
So parking permits residential, what would the answer to that be?
Well, only the design is a reserved matter. Now, what I would say, Councillor Clark, is that administration of the parking permits and who applies for them, how they're enforced, etc., that lies completely with the county council.
And Mr. Ashcroft, you want to come in as well?
So really just really to add to that, that plainly, if members are minded to grant planning permission for residential, at some point, a reserve matters application will come back. As a separate exercise to that, the parking permits will come through the Section 106 agreement. So the two aren't directly related.
So, Councillor Clark.
Right, okay, that's fine. Yes, so it'll be going to be the highways authority's problem that some of the, of course, you can't just park there all day because of the rush hour traffic where parking is excluded anyway. So, yeah, I'm happy to then second the proposal.
Recommendation. Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. And before we, just before we carry on, just really for Councillor Purdy-Horan's and colleagues' confirmation, I know you were saying it's slightly tongue-in-cheek that we could be here until after midnight discussing this. Well, we won't be. We wouldn't be.
To be subject to a final guillotine at 6:30, only to have to come back again, would be unreasonable. So, I'm grateful for what the officers have tried to do to move business on, because I've seen in years gone by, in the last 20 years I've been here, people roll their eyes and they say, did they not bother reading the report? So thank you very much. I appreciate the efforts that they've gone to.
Thank you, Councillor Purdy-Horan, and you will be able to get back to the soap operas. So, now, just before we've had the proposal moved and seconded, but I've got another speaker wishing to speak. So, Councillor Price, do you want to make your comment, please?
Yeah, I've got quite a few questions, and before I do that, could I suggest that we take a brief comfort break now?
Yes, actually, I hadn't realised the time was going actually. So we have been here nearly 2 hours, haven't we? So I understand what you're saying. So yes, if it's all right with colleagues, and I hope our visitors understand the need for a little bit of a break. We won't be too long. So it's just gone 4:20 now. Shall we aim to be back at the very latest by 4:30? So you've got about 8 minutes. So we'll turn the YouTube off for now, but we will come back on. It stays on. Oh, it stays on. Or just make sure okay, so the screens will go by. So anyone watching on YouTube who's not here with us in the building, we're having a short break, and we will be back by 4:30. So thank you. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, it's 4:30, just gone 4:30, so we'll resume the meeting. Thank you, everybody, for your patience. It was important to have a short break, and also thanks to people who may be watching us online. So we finished part one of the meeting before the break, and we're just waiting now for a question from Councillor Price. So, Councillor Price.
Yeah, thank you. I've got a few questions, some of which follow on from points that have been raised already. Just on the travel plan for the new flats, the new flats obviously have parking space allocation that is considerably under what is normally expected, and the mitigation for that is this travel plan. And I think what I'd like to understand is how exactly does that travel plan adequately mitigate for that lack of parking? I think I'd like to just follow up on a point again that I think Councillor Clark has already made about the parking permits and how that's administered, and how will those new permits be paid for? Because obviously for existing parking permit schemes in Central West Bridgeford, that's paid for by the residents, and it's generally when a new scheme is proposed, that would be consulted on by the residents and brought forward if there is agreement. So I'd like to understand the difference, and also in determining the scope. So the scope is currently Fox Road and Radcliffe Road. What criteria is used to determine that scope? Because is there any consideration for impact of overspill parking on other streets beyond those two? And just related to that, I'm assuming the fact that the residential streets are much closer to the development and not included in scope because they already have residence parking permit schemes in place. So if we could just confirm that that assumption is correct. I have a question about the daylight assessment. So this is in relation to the new stand development, and in paragraph 271, there's an assessment has been done that concluded that of the 174 habitable rooms assessed, 162 would meet the criteria and see no change, and the 12 remaining windows would experience a modest change. I think one of the questions that I have based on objections that have been received is how have you determined, in that assessment, how have you determined the use of those rooms? Because presumably there's a different requirement for a bedroom window as opposed to a different type of room. So how is that room use determined as part of that assessment? And also, kind of supplementary to that, is the assessment, is it only computer modelling, or has there been site visits to assess the impact? A question around the plaza is, because I just like some clarification on the use of that space. I mean, we've very rightly been asked to consider not just the two buildings, but the public amenity space around that. And I guess the question, where I'm not entirely clear is, is it predominantly for pedestrian access, or is it a car park, or is it both? And is it open access, or is it gated? And does that use change depending on whether it's a match day or not? And I still have some very deep concerns around the viability of the flats and the contribution, the developer contribution, because it feels very much like, we've talked a lot about how that cake needs to be allocated, and from what I can see, there's not enough cake to go around. Public services do need to be funded when there are new developments, and there's a shortfall, and that shortfall is justified on the basis of the economic benefit that the stand will provide. But for me, that feels deeply unsatisfactory that the developer in this instance is able to say, I'm not prepared to pay the whole cake will have to do with less, because those services will still need to be provided, and if they're not provided by a developer contribution, then the rest of us will be picking up that tab. So I think I'd really like to understand why we've got to that position, and what is there anything that we can do as a planning committee to say that that's not acceptable, and can we alter that balance?
Okay, thank you for those questions. I think, I mean, I'll let the officers come in on there, but the viability discussion, I think, unless the officers need to add anything else to that, I think we have had that explained to us pretty well with regards to the negotiations with the applicant, and also the fact that there was an independent assessment, I think, wasn't there, about the application, but I'm sure we'll have that confirmed. And also with regards to the parking permits, the road parking permits, paragraph 246, I think, is quite helpful, because it refers to the applicant making a contribution of £80,000 to the cost of such permits. But the other points that Councillor Price has made refer to the travel plan, and also the daylight assessment. How do we determine that? So can we just get some quick answers to those, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, the travel plan, the mitigation, that's all set out in the report, paragraph 230 to 240. What would be in the travel plan information pack, how would it be relayed to future occupiers, how it would be monitored, promotion of travel incentives, providing their own employees a travel voucher for public transport, etc., etc. That's all outlined in there. In regard to the permit parking, we're at the behest of the Highway Authority. They decide the potential impact and where it would be, but practically speaking, how far would someone want to walk to park a car away from their house is a question, and that's been considered by the Highway Authority. And that's why they've included Fox Road and Radcliffe Road. In regard to the sunlight and daylight issues, it's a computer model based on the floor plan of Bridgeford House and nearby residents. So it's based on a computer model of something that's there. So that's how they know what's window, what's kitchen, what's not kitchen, etc. And the main impact would be on Bridgeford House. As a worst case scenario, I think one of the windows was affected 24% on daylight hours, and the target's a loss of 20%, and that's over the course of a year. So I don't think that was that significant.
So can I just clarify? My question around the daylight was in relation to the stand. So on the residents of Rosebery Avenue and
We'll just get a plan up, but generally,
Yeah, we'll just get the plan up on. We'll get the plan up on the screen. We'll get the plan up on the screen just to try and visualise that Rosebery Avenue.
yeah, generally speaking, in terms of sunlight and daylight, all the properties along the road to the south are to the south of the development. So the sun would start at the east and go around to the west to the front of their property, and this development's to the north of their property. So in terms of sunlight, obviously the reports come back to say it wouldn't be affected by sunlight and daylight, but Bridgeford House would be very marginally affected by sunlight and daylight.
Okay, thank you. Right, I have one more speaker, and that's Councillor Gaunt, please.
Thank you. I just wanted to respond and carry on with what was just brought up then again, and I was brushed off by the chair then. The stakeholders in the wider area have called for around £1 million contribution. An independent assessment that was agreed by on a viability assessment came up with 700,000. Still don't think we've got a reasonable answer to this as to why Forest want to avoid paying £270,000. They're an amazing community organisation that's helping lots in our community, and I don't understand why they would neglect to pay that amount. It was independently agreed. I think this is an important factor because you're asking us to discuss or weigh up the economic benefits versus the social and environmental negatives, maybe, or economic negatives. At the moment, I'm broadly in favour of the whole thing. I think it's going to be a fantastic idea for our for Forest and for Nottinghamshire, but there's got to be an economic benefit to this to Forest. Otherwise, they wouldn't be doing it. They're not a benevolent organisation. They're just there to serve their fans. There's an economic benefit to building this stand from them. So I just don't understand why they would not go for that. That's not what we're here to discuss. What I'd like to find out, though, is a clear point. Can we make it a condition of this paying is accepted? Condition that they pay the £700,000 that was independently assessed and made viable, or can we change the actual thing to start with and say that they should pay that amount? Because that's my question, really, because I think we could amend this to say they should pay that extra little amount. It's a very small amount in the grand scheme of things, but to Forest, £270,000 is a lot less money than it is to the schools that need that money. So I just keep going back to the same point, but you brushed it off before, and I do think it's a very important point that if we can amend it, it would be very helpful for our citizens and would still mean that Forest get their stand and everything that they would like. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Gort. Well, I certainly didn't have the intention of brushing anything off because this is a very serious question and a very serious matter. But for clarity, though, I will ask Mr. Ashcroft to answer your question directly. So it's coming from an expert as opposed to me.
Thank you, Chairman. Plainly, this is a fundamental point. It's a point that many members have been raising. Ideally, I would have liked to have been sat here this afternoon with a package that Forest had agreed to that was up to the full £700,000. But that has not been the case. And effectively, we get back to the point that effectively my role is to ask you to determine the application as it is on its merits. And that's not intended to be a bland answer, it's just a matter of fact answer. Plainly, what Forest have invited effectively us as officers, and therefore we are now inviting you as members, to come to that judgment about whether the economic benefits, which nobody disputes, are so significant as to offset, as it were, that gap between what's being offered and the notional £700,000 available in the viability assessment. We as officers have balanced that, and on that basis, we conclude, both in terms of the significance of the economic benefits and the very significant benefits that flow to the club because of the stand, and also because of that package that I mentioned earlier about how we've sought to apportion the 430,000 to the issues that we feel directly need mitigating. We feel that that is an acceptable way forward. Plainly, as both I've said and Mr. Miles said, plainly, that now becomes your judgment. And I think that's potentially the crux of the matter, Chairman. So hopefully that at least gives you an explanation in terms of why we are here and the judgment that needs to be made. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Ashcroft, and I hope that's a little clearer and helpful, even if it's not necessarily what you're hoping to hear, but that is the situation, that is the answer. Right, I've got two more speakers, and then I think we're because everyone's had a say. I'm letting Councillor Thomas come back, and then Councillor Walker. So, Councillor Thomas.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. I think for me, this £270,000 is, a deal breaker, and I'm being asked to vote on a package that has a lot of merit, and okay, there are lots of things that could be discussed, there are lots of things that could be better, but my decision is going to be based on the fact that they are holding back £270,000 of the money that was actually been said that they can pay, that is viable for them to pay, and that the officers have agreed to, and I disagree with it fundamentally, and on that basis I will have to vote against this. application, whereas otherwise I wouldn't. You're saying there's no way that we can change the recommendation to make sure that Section 106 isn't signed off unless that £270,000 is forthcoming from the developer. That means that I have to vote against this application, which I don't want to do. I'm deeply distressed that there isn't a way for us to have this conversation, especially since in the officer report, it has been brought up as something that is for us to look at in this discussion. And so I am deeply distressed by that. I'd just like to say that. And Mr. Ashcroft has said there is only so much cake to go round. They are keeping a third of the cake. That is the point. There's still not enough cake to go round. But if we had that £270,000, it could go towards the schools, it could go towards parking permits on more streets, or it could go to affordable housing. And that discussion could be had. And I am absolutely sure that the applicant would not want this application to fail on the basis of £270,000 on a project this size. It is ludicrous that I am being asked to make my decision on the basis of that. And for me, it is a sticking point. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Thomas, that's very clear, and you've made your point very clear indeed. I think it's only right for Mr. Ashcroft to come in and help us with that, please, and clarify.
Jim, thank you. Clearly, it's always my role to try and give as good advice as I can, and the advice that I gave to you was very matter-of-fact advice. Plainly, you're here to determine the application, and it's not for us, you'll pardon the football expression, to change the position of the goalposts as part of the discussion. Plainly, different members might have different views, but if members are so minded that you can't support the application, there is an opportunity. I know it's unusual in Rushcliffe, but to defer the consideration of the application to see whether a revised package can be brought forward to you. So effectively, what your officers are not saying is that you can't do something different. It's just that you have to, as the application stands, make a decision on the application now, or seek to defer it for further discussion. So that's almost the situation in which you find yourself in. I know different members might have different views about that, but those are effectively the opportunities. You either make a decision to either grant permission or to refuse it on the basis of the details that you have, or you seek to defer and have further discussions. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Ashcroft. Now, Councillor Walker indicated to speak.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I was just looking for confirmation that we can't change the recommendation in this arena. Is that correct? In this arena, we can't change the recommendation in any way? Like we can't?
Yeah. We'll get clarification. We'll get clarification from the borough solicitor on that. Yeah, Mrs. Sells.
Thank you, Chair. No, you couldn't today compel the applicant to provide the 700,000. The 430,000 is what has been offered by the applicant and agreed by your officers, as you've heard. The option, if you're not happy with that, as Mr. Ashcroft has set out, is to defer the application from today with a mandate to officers to go away and discuss with the applicant further whether an increased package could be offered. If that doesn't come to fruition, it would come back before members and you would take a decision then whether to accept the 400,000. If an increased package is offered, then again, the decision would still be yours. So that's all that could be done today, or you make a decision to approve or refuse based on the 430 offered. But if the refusal was purely based on that lack of contribution, in terms of that being defended at an appeal, it wouldn't be the strongest reason for refusal. And indeed, the applicant could offer more at an appeal, which would mean the appeal was basically defenceless. So if members were minded that that was their only reason for refusal was around this package, then I would recommend deferral and let officers and the applicant continue those negotiations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Sells. Thank you. So probably no need to come back at this stage. So I think who was it? Councillor Walker who raised that, wasn't it? Councillor Walker. Is that helpful?
I had a point and I've just forgotten it. So we would have to effectively refuse this application, just defer, despite kind of agreeing with everything around it, except for that one point. We can't just make a little tweak. We have to defer it. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it would come back.
Mrs. Sells is just going to confirm that.
So you would be not making a decision today. You'd be deferring to the next available meeting of the committee, which would be, as soon as we could get everybody back together in a matter of weeks. A very short report would come back updating the committee on what had happened during that time to make a further decision at that point. So we wouldn't need to repeat everything that's happened today. It would just be an update at that meeting.
Right, okay, thank you. I think that's clarified the situation. We've had a long discussion and debate. There's a probability or a possibility of going over old ground again, I suspect, which is not going to be helpful for anyone, I would suggest. I think all points have been covered. This is a tremendously significant and important application, as we have read and heard. It's been in the system for a long time, but we have to make a decision in the interest of everyone, the applicant and the authority and our residents. And we're here to make that decision today. That's why we've got the meeting. And I think we have had fair and deep discussion, and we have had the recommendation in the report moved and seconded. So I think we're in a position where we need to make a decision. So councillors Thomas.
Would it be possible for me to move that we defer, please, Chair?
We've already got a motion on the table from Councillor Purgeon-Horan and Councillor Clark, so that motion has to be dealt with first. If that motion is defeated, then we would need another motion on the table, which could either be a deferral or a refusal.
Thank you for that clarification. Councillor Price, briefly, did you want to say anything, or has your question been answered?
Yeah, my question was the same, but obviously we got the motion before the discussion had been completed.
But it's important, it's clear, it's very important people understand the procedure and the legality and what you have to do. So I hope that is clear to everybody here. So for confirmation then, we as I was saying, we have had a very long discussion. I'm sure some people will think we've had an overly long discussion, but frankly, it is important that we get all the facts. I mean, that's what we're here for. So we've had the recommendation moved and seconded. I'll read it out again just to confirm what that the proposal is. It's been moved and seconded. And the proposal is a hybrid application comprising full planning permission for the redevelopment of the Peter Taylor stand, including the demolition of existing buildings and structures, new public realm, replacement club shop, car parking associated works, and outline planning permission for up to 170 residential units, including flexible uses, Class E, a ground floor, and an approval for access, layout and scale. So everybody is clear on what the recommendation that has been moved and seconded is. We now need to make a decision. So in the traditional way, those in favour of the recommendation moved and seconded, please raise your hands.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
7.
Oh, 1 sec, sorry.
Up again, let's count.
Sorry, just keep them up, thank you.
Keep your hands clear.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yeah.
So that's 9. Is there anybody against the recommendation? 2. And for the record, are there any abstentions? No, which you don't do on planning anyway, but I have to ask. Yeah, I have to ask. It's for the record, Councillor Clark. And so thank you. So right, we've taken the vote on the recommendation, and permission is granted. So as per the report. So thank you for and as per the late representations as well in front of us. So with that, I think decision's taken. It's coming up to 5 to 5. So thank you, officers, for your work. I do not underestimate the amount of time that's got into this. I know it's been a tremendous amount of work. Thank you, colleagues, councillors as well, because it's a big decision that we've made. And we'll close the meeting at 4:55. Thank you.